Good Wednesday to you, everybody. Incom 731. Welcome to week boom bam 11. How you doing out there? It looks as if the camera is having a hard time focusing. That's what it looks on my end. So let's see what we can do here. See if we can give it a focal point. Bring it back. Is that better? How much? Is that better? Jeez. Yeah. Okay. Welcome to the week. Clearly, I am not sufficiently caffeinated. Last of the morning coffee from Shortwave Coffee Company. Cool little company in my town. Or a coffee shop. Okay, so for this video, which I see is not, it still doesn't look focused to me, but we're going to proceed. So maybe turn off the visual and just listen to the audio. All right, because looking at this, the way I see it, if I were you, this would drive me crazy. Okay, two things. This week, all right, we're going to take a slight sidestep. And what I'm going to have you do is look at a study that looks at a lot of the assumptions behind the material that we have been reading through. Specifically, look at a study that I did that became my dissertation here at Regent. So you'll see in the module 11, that what I need you to do is you go to the Regent online library and you just get through that through the My Regent portal like you would anything else. Click on the library. And if you type in Jeff Gardner, 2018, and then the title of the work, which is Strangers to the Village, Social Media Use Among Displaced Assyrian Christians in Ankawa, Iraq. Yeah, that's a mouthful, I know. This should bring you to my dissertation, and you want to get to the online version. You don't want to check it out. I don't even think it exists in print. Everything being done through ProQuest. And then online, I need you to read the introduction, chapter 5, and appendix C. Okay, I mean, at the very least. Now, when you first open up a work, you want to look at how it's organized. So look through the table of contents and read, the abstract and the dedication, all this. Yeah, fine. But in terms of what we'll be covering for this week, it's those three parts: introduction, chapter 5, and appendix C. Okay. There are a couple of you who have not turned in your technology tool assignment. It was due the 28th, 2 days ago. If you've had an issue, please reach out to me. All right, so I'll be grading those this week. And then the discussion questions for this week will center on the work that I did in that document that is my dissertation. And to give you a little bit of a preview, back, it almost sounds like I should say way back. In 2013, I was reading the sorts of material that we have been reading through, in which there were all sorts of wondrous, glowing predictions about the potential and the impact of social media and digital connections. And the authors of these works, like Cohen and Schmidt, like the one you're reading now, if you read through the introduction, we're going to be more connected, we're going to be more friended, we're going to be more liked, and we'll feel better, and this great connectivity and friendedness, making up a word, will give us a great sense of ourselves, and we'll have all this extra time on our hands, and we'll be able to do all these wonderful things. And especially, the authors point out, for the distressed peoples of the world, this will be a great boon. Okay, I thought, is that the case? Because I had been working globally in the humanitarian media field, and I had seen social media and electronic connectivity being used, in some strange, out of the way places, like way out on the Kilimanjaro plains of East Africa, in the middle of the tropics, in the center of the Congo. I mean, just places you wouldn't expect to see social media. All right, that's it. But I wasn't seeing the sort of an impact on the users as described by authors like Schmidt and Cohen. So I thought, okay, is this anecdotal? Is this my experience? I'm only seeing a small slice, and I'm not seeing the overall impact that they predict. Or are their predictions not quite in line with the actual impacts? So I decided to do a study. And I decided to focus on Christian refugees who had escaped with their lives and very little else from the advance of the Islamic State when the war broke out in Syria and Iraq in 2013, 2014. I happened to be working in Iraq in those years, and as it would happen, I continued to work in Iraq from 2014 through 2018 extensively. So anyway, so I sat down with hundreds, in fact, initially thousands of refugees and listened to their stories. And I conducted I composed a quantitative research instrument, a survey. But first, to determine, did they use social media? Then what types? And it turned out about 80 something percent were using Facebook. And I started asking them what they thought about it. Did they see it as a tool to solve their most pressing problems? Did it make them feel more connected? Did it make them feel more friended? Did it make them feel more or less hopeful about their present situation? And I ran a series of quantitative tests on the data. And then taking those results, then I sat down with select numbers of them who'd taken the survey, and I did a qualitative analysis. I asked them open-ended questions that pertain to the questions they had gotten on the survey. And then I compiled the two, and that became the dissertation. I'm not going to tell you what I found because that would ruin the surprise. Okay. So I thought it might be interesting to have a look. Now, what I find, this is what I found in that little corner of the distressed world, and may or may not be taken as the trend for everywhere there are distressed peoples and there are connective media and media. All right. But for that particular place, that particular time, and those peoples, that's what I found. So that's what we're going to be doing this week. Okay. So let's take a look at the questions from last week and go through them very quickly and see what we can flesh out. And by the way, because we do have a final exam, I know that some of these questions, there's an intentional level of subjectivity. So for instance, from last week, week 10, question number 1 goes, do you agree with that social media are substantively changing the nature of revolutions, both at home and abroad? Okay, so on an exam, I would ask you to give your opinion. And then, I'm not going to ask you for a citation during an exam, but I would ask you to mention, quote, cite why it is you think what you do. So be prepared to reiterate the opinions that you articulate in the discussion questions. Okay, Crystal, let's take you first because you went first. You wrote, I agree that social media has substantially changed the nature of revolutions, both at home and abroad. What was once heralded as a key way to stay in touch, social media now faces criticism over its negative effects on human behavior due to the speed in which information is spread. Social media has a huge role in society. On the one side, social media helps individuals stay connected with family and friends, especially those that have. On the other, social media may increase competition and set unrealistic expectations on relationships. One example of this has been seen in social media's growing impact on our lives. In this article, the author explored the influence of social media on our daily lives and psychological well-being. It depicts the impact over the past 70 years, highlighting policy measures. Okay, that is true. Now, here's something, and I picked this answer on purpose, not just because you were first, Crystal. All of that is true concerning social media, but that wasn't the question. The question was the nature of revolutions, and looking at what you're doing, what you're reading, I should say, in Schmidt and Cohen. We're talking about political revolutions, not social changes. That is, relationships and things. So, Crystal, and I'm not picking on you, Crystal. I'm just that for everybody, be sure that you're sort of on the right page with the question. If you wanted to make the case that increase in competition, unreal expectations in relationships, that now, if you want to extend this to say the relationship between the citizenry and the government, or there are non-expert experts competing for public attention and marginalizing the government, and both of which, by way of trends, I believe are true where social media is concerned. And I'll tell you what, if you're looking for a project, the rise of the non-expert expert, that is, how it is now that people are shifting to getting advice for their problems from social media influencers, is very, very real. And the question is, why is it happening? And is it a good thing or helpful or not? I mean, is it helping these people? Big open question. Okay. If you wanted to sort of segue that way, that would be fine. But be sure to be on point about the nature of the question. Okay. So, for instance, Emily, let's quickly go to you. That Brewer et al. Discussed the Tunisian revolution, essentially the role social media played for both mobilizing against the oppressive regime that was in power. Social media enabled people to gather together around the injustices they were seeing and allowed for collaboration. The protests within the specific political movement were powered by the connections provided by social media, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and then note, Emily, that in my research on this topic, I find it entirely supportive of the idea that social media is changing the nature of revolutions. Okay, so good. Okay, so that's the sort of answer for this question that we're driving at. Okay, question number 2. Stopping terrorism has been a primary strategic goal of U.S. foreign policy based on Chapter 5. What is the U.S. doing poorly, and what is it doing well regarding the use of new technologies to stop terrorism? All right, and then I asked you, I said, please explain your answer. Now, for this one, how can I put this? One of the things that I noticed in the answers for this question was the lack of answers for this question. And so, folks, you have to be participating in the discussions. And for those of you that aren't, and there were when I graded questions 1 through 8, there were a lot of folks that hadn't. And you're leaving points on the table. All right. So if you're not participating, if you're not responding to your classmates, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing in the class. All right. So that was one of the things that jumped out to me about the answers for this question. But that being said, let's take a look at the answer. Michael, the author said there's a fine line between censorship and security, and we must create safeguards accordingly. Okay, as far as security goes, the U.S. does a pretty good job of regulating content supporting terror. All platforms I'm on have processes to report nefarious content. In this way, the user plays a role in removing such content, which, though imperfect, is still an effective and powerful capability that can help minimize the reach of groups with nefarious intent. Where the U.S. could do better pertains to the censorship and government overreach. For example, under pressure from the Biden administration during the pandemic, many users had their social media accounts suspended for spreading information contrary to or challenging the government's response. We learned that many of the prescribed measures were ineffective and or harmful. Very true. And so, excuse me, it seems to be the full-feathered answer to this question is it's a mixed bag. Because on the one hand, when you have regulatory procedures in place, whether it's user-driven or platform-driven, you're always going to block out or scoop up things you don't intend. Now, it's interesting. Again, here's another topic for someone if you're looking for a project. What's one of the things that's interesting that's going on online is from a communications perspective, is how users are adjusting their language around language that triggers the censor mechanisms on platforms. YouTube is an example. There are certain words on YouTube that if you use them, then because there's a written transcript produced of the audio, then those words will trigger the push this content into the we need to take a look at it pile. And for YouTube, you can either have a video taken down or it can be put under review. And while it's under review, it's down. And so for content providers that are dependent upon the video being up for a revenue stream, this is a bad thing. So, where say a reference to someone ending their own life is concerned, instead of the S word that describes it, content providers will say they unalived themselves. Instead of and I see, and you can tell I'm intentionally and carefully avoiding using the words themselves. Instead of the word which has 3 letters and starts with a G, and it references that thing made out of metal that one holds to launch another small metal projectile. They don't use that word. They use the word pew pew. Okay. So there's this sort of revolving language dynamic that goes on to avoid the unintentional catching and review of material that would interrupt revenue stream. So it's not a perfect system. And the other element at play here is that oppressive regimes are not technological knuckleheads. They have within their structure very, very savvy people. You might call them bad actors or black hats, who too are skilled at using social media and connective media and online platforms to catch those and trap those who use these platforms to, whether it's actually rebel against the government or oppose government policies. China is an outstanding example. And I mean, by outstanding, I don't mean yay. I mean outstanding in the sense of how it's managed this to effectively control what goes on online and what is said about the government. Okay, question number 3. Schmidt and Cohen suggests that cyber warfare will overtake conventional warfare. Do you agree? Julie, you went first here. Let's take you. I agree with Schmidt and Cohen. Their suggestion that cyber warfare will overtake conventional warfare is accurate, as evidenced by the development of artificial intelligence robotics that resemble dogs. Okay, now they're not talking about hardware here. So, and I'm not picking on you, Julie, but make sure that you understand the distinction between software and hardware, media and medium, because we're in the communication business, and now in an electronic age, we're in the electronic communication business, at least in part. And we have to know the difference between the two. All right. So, but back to you, Julie. Intelligent robotics that resemble dogs, drones, attacks, power grid threats. Okay, so now we're in the right neck of the woods that we have heard about in recent years. Companies and organizations alike have cyber attacks that involve ransomware. However, I also believe that we will still rely heavily on our military troops serving in these locations. The two work together in some capacity. Okay, yeah, I think that I personally, and I'm going to chime in. I usually don't. I'm going to chime in on what Schmidt and Cohen are up to here. I think that they overestimate, or I should say, underestimate the necessity of occupying physical space as still a key component in warfare and winning a conflict. And for those of you in the military, you know this by rote. Okay, it's one thing to hamper the troops or of an opposing force, or disable them. It's something quite altogether different to occupy the territory, because that ultimately, unless you're fighting a purely defensive engagement in which you're just trying to keep things out, ultimately the objective is offensive, and that means seizing physical territory and or so disabling the resources within that territory that there's no capacity to resist. All right, so I don't know that it's going to lean that heavily, as Schmidt and Cohen seem to imply. Okay, question number 4. In your opinion, and again, say on an exam, if you saw something like this, that would be just like this, but I would ask you to be able, and yes, from memory, to recall, what it was by way of evidentiary citation. And I don't mean I need an actual link, because you're not going to be linking out during the exam, but some sort of a reference that contains enough detail that I could type it in and go, oh yeah, I see what you mean. that would support your opinion. So back to the question. In your opinion, but drawing from your readings this week, does new media technology help or hinder conflict resolution among competing groups within nations, like Jews and Palestinians in Israel, or Hindus and Muslims in India? Please explain. And again, here, if you're looking for a topic, that is an interesting one. How media is being used in these conflicts. Okay, Kylie, let's take you. New media technologies both help and hinder the resolutions of conflicts between groups inside nations. Okay, now Kylie, I picked you on purpose, and again, I'm not picking on you personally, but here's something that I want you, and this means everybody, to avoid. Okay, new media technology both helps and hinders. Okay, yeah, fine. Does it help more or does it hinder more? Okay, it is a rarity in life that there's absolutely an equilibrium, a perfect balance between this and that, right? So what I'm asking is for you and look, that's okay. If you don't get it right, you don't get it right. And if you say, this is my best, this is my opinion based on, and then you cite the sources that you've used to come to that opinion. And it's okay, as you develop into a communication professional, to put forward opinions that may or may not pan out to be true. I mean, this is election season. Watch the news and look at all the opinion. I don't say opinion makers, but some of them certainly are. They're there to shape opinion. The opinion producers. That's an awkward phrase, but anyhow. And then what happens after the first Tuesday in November? At least half of them, are going to be proven wrong. Okay, so don't be afraid of that. I see that a lot for PhD students who are developing. Back to you, Kylie. New media technology both helps and hinders the resolution of conflicts between competing groups inside nations such as Muslims, Hindus, Jews, or Palestinians. On the one hand, new media encourages communication awareness by providing voices to marginalized communities and bringing regional issues to the attention of global audience. Social media, other platforms have the ability to bring people from different culture background together and facilitate their interaction that might not have been possible in more conventional contexts. Okay, now I'm going to, and again, I'm not picking on you, Kylie, and I think it's Kaylee, but if I ever pronounce your name wrong, anybody, please send me an email. Say, hey, that's not me. Okay. I'm going to suggest that people look at that in a different way. That one of the things I think we see emerging within social media, that we are not drawing closer together across cultural lines and ethnic lines, but rather we're drawing closer together based on emphasized commonalities or emphasized differences. That's my professional opinion looking at the landscape. So I would never strike this answer as wrong and not give credit for taking a whack at it. But I want you to sort of consider that as you look at these trends. Okay, digital tools can be used by grassroots movements and peace projects to foster empathy and understanding by humanizing the other and providing narratives alternative to violent conflict. Also, communication facilitating technology can also exacerbate problems. New media facilitates rapid dissemination of hate speech, deception, extremist views, which can deepen rifts and foster hostilities. That is true. Now, I'm pulling a lot out of your answer here, which is, very, very detailed answer. Thank you very much. Because, and again, I'm using this as a means by which to discuss the question, not to pick on you. Okay. Okay. Rapid dissemination of hate speech, deception, extremist views. Okay. Or that's certainly true. Or it can be used to promote mono views. That is a view that whether the portrayal is tremendously sympathetic or antithetical to the issue or the individual. Okay, one of the things that social media does, because one of the ways that it's structured is it has the capacity, unlike say print media, which just goes out the door and you don't know if it goes into somebody's lap or into somebody's cat box. Okay, we used to say bird cage, but who keeps birds anymore? I don't know. Birds, parrots and stuff freak me out. Don't like them. Anyway, one of the tools of social media is it allows the content disseminator, and and this could be your own blog, I mean, your own website, your own podcast, anything. And if these tools are available to you to very specifically target users that have a predetermined, because the data miners will give you this information, I mean, for a cost, that have a predetermined bias towards the information you produce. And as such, you can produce a one-sided portrayal, even if it's tremendously sympathetic in how it's constructed. It doesn't need to be constructed in the negative to appeal to the bias of that audience. One of the, just a little side note, one of the interesting things within this election cycle is there are major newspapers, the Washington Post, the LA Times, I think the Miami Herald, double check me on that, who have declined to endorse a presidential candidate. And that, there are editors and chiefs and employees for the papers, and they're just losing it. They're like, oh, we've done this for years. Washington Post is perhaps the first one. And it's that Jeff Bezos, he's in league with Trump, or he's been threatened by Trump. And the reason he's doing it, I don't know. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know why these papers have declined within their op-ed sections to endorse a candidate. I suspect that it's more a response to market than it is any type of fear or belief of running afoul of this candidate, Donald Trump, if he wins office. I suspect what's happening is, for the last about 10 years, the business model for these papers have been targeting those individuals that they could tell had a predetermined, had a preset bias towards the particular political angle. In the case of the Washington Post, it tends on the political spectrum to be liberal. As their paper sales, their print sales declined, their digital sales had to backfill the revenue. And the way they did that was targeting individuals that they could tell from the data miners had a specific bias. Okay. I suspect that landscape is shifting. Specifically, I suspect that there are now a number of non-expert experts, so we call them non-traditional media or non-legacy media, that have been eating in to that market and are free. Because if you want to get the Washington Post, for instance, online, it's behind a paywall. You have to cop. I don't think it's much, but you have to cough up the dough. And when I'm looking for a story and I'm looking for information that I see published in the Washington Post, it takes me about 2 seconds to copy the headline that gets printed as the tease, to come in and click and then, pay my way through the paywall, to copy the headline, throw it back out on the worldwide, on the internet, and find the same story covered somewhere else for nothing. That I'm not going to pay the Washington Post for this stuff. And I suspect that newspapers are moving away from being identified, directly with those that have specific opinion biases, because I think that they're starting now, they're going to go after a part of the market that doesn't express an opinion. I think, again, my suspicion is it's not about some sort of fear of government overreach by Donald Trump when he's elected. And that's how there are some people that are spinning this where the Washington Post is concerned. I think they're just going after they basically tapped out the market demographic of extreme opinion bias in favor of what they do. And they're now shifting and looking at a market demographic that's a little less identifiable. They're a little more ambivalent. Like, well, maybe I support this and maybe I don't support that. Right. And the means by which for individuals to determine where a publication's targeted bias is, and what I mean by that is whose opinion bias that they're targeting are already out there. There's an app that I use that, if you've never heard of it, I want to recommend it to you. It's called, let's see if you can see right there. Okay. The little black thing right there. It's called Ground. Do you see that on my phone? Okay. And then what Ground does, if you open it up and you can select the kind of categories of various stories that you want to get. You can even get your own local news. And what Ground does is it's an aggregator. It will pull from a whole bunch of sources, and you can select which ones. And there are many, many. Various publications: Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times, your local paper, News Nation, Newsmax, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then it pulls the story from all of those, and then it gives you a rating. Let's see if I can hold this up here. Down, I know that's not the focus here is not super duper. Okay, it gives you a rating down here at the bottom. Sorry for the blur. And the red is right leaning. The white is center, and the blue is left leaning. And it gives you percentages of the publications that it has found this story, not the exact verbiage, but coverage of this issue in, and how, in general, for the entirety of the information landscape, the story is being presented. Is it being presented more from a left political perspective, from a right political perspective, or a center political perspective? I mean, you might be asking, well, how do you know what's left, right, and center? In the app, they explain the algorithm by which they determine left, right, center. Okay, because that's all important. How do you decide where something goes? Do you call it left? Do you call it right? Do you call it center? But anyway, the point is that using this app, you can go, yeah, okay, I'm going to avoid a certain opinion bias, because that's not how I see this, or maybe I'm just interested in a different perspective. I'm going to avoid an opinion bias, and I'm not going to read this in the Washington Post. I think I said Wall Street Journal. Washington Post was the first one that said, we're not going to, of these major papers, that we're not going to endorse a candidate. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to go to the Wall Street Journal, or I'm going to go to Newsmax, or I'm going to go to, LA Times. And it's hurting their revenue. Anyway, that's what I suspect. Okay. So, some have called it the weave. I call it a digression. Let's come back to you, Kylie. Schmidt and Cohen note that digital tools can be used to incite violence or mobilize hostile acts, since they make it impossible to regulate bad behavior and allow groups to quickly regularly coordinate anonymously. Digital surveillance by government can stifle dissent and increase mistrust in communities, or actually, and it can accelerate dissent, because, I mean, the first of all, there are apps that are available, social media apps that are encrypted, and you can't get into them. I use them when I'm in problematic places in the world, and I don't want my communications monitored. Some of the Middle East countries that I've worked in, and so you just can't get into them. And then secondly, the types of apps that are available to use, or the means by which you can communicate, they keep evolving. They keep, new ones keep popping up. So it's tough. New media can ultimately be used to resolve disputes through dialogue and education, but if used inappropriately, it can also serve as a catalyst for disputes to worsen, meaning, worsen things. I think what you mean. Change now lies in government, civil society, as individuals to employ new technologies to foster peace instead of war, from Schmidt and Cohen. Okay. And I know that Schmidt and Cohen's position. I'm not a cynicist, but I'm less optimistic. I do not believe that I'll tell you why, and then I'll conclude this video, because we're at half an hour, and that's way long enough. I do not believe that the medium is the solution to the problem. Why do I say that? Because we take a look back at the history of the introduction of new mediums. So, whether that's writing on clay tablets, writing that is put on something more permanent like stone, okay, writing on portable mediums like papyrus, and then vellum, that is animal skin, and then paper. Innovations in writing such as the development of the lowercase letter and punctuation, writing that is mass reproducible by machine, say the printing press. Okay, communication that's transmissible electronically, say the telegraph, and then the radio, and then the telephone, and then the cinema, and then the television, and then that lands in a device that sits in your hand. All right. If we look back at that history, what we don't see is that the introduction of a new medium solves the problems that are hanging around. Because ultimately, and I tend to look at this very much from the perspective of thinkers like Marshall McLuhan. Ultimately, or Neil Postman, here's the proposition. Can technology do for us what we won't or can't do for ourselves? In the aggregate, and ultimately, I believe the answer is no. If we cannot find a way to connect and understand one another, technology won't solve that problem. If we don't reach out and build good human relationships, technology won't solve that problem, because the problem is not the means by which we go about the activity, say, being more connected. The problem is that we don't go about the activity being more connected, just to use that as one of the examples. Okay, so great answer, Kylie. And I know this is where Schmidt and Cohen is at. For that reason, looking at it through the lens and sort of the long historical scope of new communication mediums and modes, and then the thoughts of individuals like Neil Postman or Marshall McLuhan, and they were contemporaneous to each other for a while, or Lippmann. I have my doubts, but anyway, that's just what I think. Okay. All right, everybody. That's it. That's 37 minutes and that you're not going to get back. And that's plenty enough. Okay. So I'll be grading your technology tool this week. Enjoy Halloween, go out and also All Souls Day, which comes afterwards. Okay. If you have any questions as you move through the second half of the paper, now you get the whole month of November to tackle that. But if you run into anything, you have any questions, please get in touch with me. And likewise, and some of you already have, if you're intending to do human subject research, the rules for getting your IRB certification have changed. And so make sure that you reach out to me. And some of you already have, and we can have a discussion about what to do next. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your attention. I think about you. I pray about you. And I will see you on Canvas. Take care. Bye-bye.